Hi, good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's career series. I'm Virginia Gary with the SysG Beyond Good Ideas Foundation. The mission of the foundation is to promote and enhance the capacity of future change makers. We do this through our social change leadership program, and we also do this through our social change career series, like the one that we're having today. We're very excited to be having Dr. Lakeya, who is the CEO for the Network of Social Work Management, join us today. I've had the privilege of attending a few events with Dr. Cherry throughout the year, so I'm really excited that she's here with us today. So without further ado, we want to go ahead and get started because we have a lot to cover. So Dr. Cherry, if you could just give us a background, your career journey leading you here today.
Sure. Thank you, Virginia. Hello, everyone. So I started off not necessarily wanting to become a social worker. And so when I graduated from undergrad, I thought I wanted to become an attorney. And so I moved to San Diego, started law school. I entered a law school that had a dual JD MSW program. And I thought I was going to be a civil rights, human rights attorney, work for international law, the UN, or something of that nature. However, I was into my second semester in law school and I realized I really don't want to be here. But as a first generation college student, I didn't know how to get out. Everyone was so proud of me that I was in law school, the opportunity to become an attorney, to make more money. And yeah, I just didn't know what to do. So I began having conversations with my mentors from undergrad, as well as some of my close friends. And they encouraged me to follow my heart before I got further in debt and before I continued on a path that wasn't necessarily for me. And so the school that I had chose had a JD MSW program. So I always wanted to obtain my master's in social work, but I wanted to work as an attorney with a social work background. So one of my sorority sisters, she encouraged me to apply to Columbia, which is where she was for social work. And I applied, got in. It was the only school I applied to. And I had just taken a leave of absence from law school, got in, and that was the start of my social work journey. So at Columbia, I focused on advanced generalist practice and programming, working with families, youth, and children. The first few years out of school, I was working with youth and children. I was working at a child advocacy center in New York as a therapist and forensic evaluator. I worked for Harlem Children's Zone for a while as a senior case planner doing home visits. Then ultimately, I was tired of the New York weather. So I relocated home to California and I got a job at a parole office. That was never part of what I wanted to do. But I saw a significant increase in pay and opportunity, so I took it. So I worked as a senior social worker at the parole office in my local hometown for about 2 years before I began to experience burnout. Around that time, I began to question whether I could do this long term and what was next for me. I also was no longer receiving clinical supervision, so I wasn't working towards my licensing hours, which I know sometimes seems like a requirement in California. So ultimately, I decided to leave that job and I relocated to Washington, D.C. and went on a more macro route. So I began working at a tech company as a social worker, worked there for a few years, began obtaining business development and marketing experience. And from there, I moved into my role at the Network for Social Work Management as CEO, and I've been here for 8 years.
Wow, that's a very diverse background.
Yeah, it's been quite the journey.
Yes. So speaking of the Network for Social Work Management, part of our social change leadership program, we had one of your Network for Social Work Management policy fellows, Terrell White, and I had the privilege of attending the policy fellow virtual presentations and hearing the work that those fellows are doing, which spurred me to do more research on the Network for Social Work Management because I didn't realize how many opportunities are provided through your organization. Can you talk a little bit about, we have some social workers in the audience, and we also have some MSW students in the audience who are graduating and looking for opportunities. Can you talk to us about some of the opportunities to get involved in your organization?
Definitely. So Terrell is great. So you mentioned the Policy Fellows Program. That's a program that I created in 2015. A foundation in New York was funding social work programs who were invested in getting social workers more interested in policy. And so that program is a mentorship program essentially for social workers who are in leadership roles, who want to focus more on a policy area of interest, but who need mentorship in order to know what to do and to kind of navigate that policy arena. And so that program tends to be about 9 months. And at the culmination of the project, the fellows are required to do a poster presentation, if in person, or a virtual presentation, if virtual, obviously, of their work of the last 9 months. And so we've had about 5 cohorts of fellows throughout the year. That's a great program. In the past, we've had an international mentoring program, international mentors and participants, very similar to the Policy Fellows program, with the exception of a project component. One of the programs that I created, my doctoral program, is Change Makers of Color. And that was created to address the racial leadership gap in the nonprofit sector. And that's a program that gives leaders of color in the sector, or people of color in the sector who have leadership aspirations, an opportunity to receive executive coaching, mentoring, didactic training, as well as expand their social capital through various networking opportunities. We also have an academic journal. We have webinars, lunch and learns, in-person conferences pre-pandemic. We also have a virtual summit, which we're currently advertising right now, and a slew of other opportunities and resources, such as our executive circle, and additional opportunities as I come up with them. Hi, Thanera.
And membership is, how would one become involved and become a member?
So the network previously was a membership association where people had to pay dues. But now the organization operates as a 501c3 nonprofit. So anyone can join for free. We'll still consider you to be a member. All you have to do is go to our website, socialworkmanager.org, and go to the join section. Once you provide your information, then you have access to all of the emails and all of the other content that we provide our audience.
Wonderful. And I know some folks in the audience are interested in that, so I'll be happy to share the link with everybody and the recording later today. So you mentioned Change Makers of Color, and that was your project when you were a DSW student, focusing on addressing the racial leadership gap in the nonprofit sector. And I wanted to go back to that, ask you a few questions. For you personally, what do you want to see more of as far as diversity and equity in the sector? And what are some examples of how we can create a sense of inclusion, belonging, and equity in the workplace on a daily basis?
Ooh, good questions. I wasn't ready for that. Okay, so first, you answered it with your question, and that we actually should see diversity. And so I focus on the racial leadership gap in the sector because as an executive of color, I realized there just weren't too many people who look like me, especially when I first started. I'd go to social work conferences and other nonprofit events, and while networking, I'd meet executive directors and CEOs, and they were all white. And it was rare that I met anyone of color. And if I did meet someone of color, typically they were of another generation. So through my work with the network over time, we began getting membership data and seeing that the majority of our audience, again, was white. And I began to think about social work values and ideas around social justice. And I wondered if this is something that we really care about and believe, and if many of the people that we're serving are of color, how come our representation doesn't show diversity? And so this is why I decided to research it. As I began my research, I saw reports from Board Source as well as the Building Movement Project that indicated that this is actually a thing, that the nonprofit sector has been aware of these issues for well over 20 years and hasn't done anything about it. Similar to other sectors, I guess they just don't know how to move the needle. And so for me, I think it's really about getting intentional. We know that there's people of color who are capable and willing and wanting to be in leadership roles. So it's time for people to either step back or make room for them to be there. And so with change makers of color, the data shows that oftentimes people of color who do desire leadership, they have the same education, they have the same qualifications, and they actually desire to lead more, but they don't have the network to get there. And so if you've heard of affinity bias, oftentimes people who look like each other tend to associate with others who look like them. So if a board is all white or an executive team is all white, there's something unconscious there oftentimes, sometimes not unconscious, that lends them to immediately go for others who look like them. And so addressing those biases, but then again, creating policies and unbiased practices to allow for more people to get in and have access to opportunities. With regards to inclusion and belonging, I think it's important now, especially after last year with George Floyd's murder, we saw that everyone is all of a sudden committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, but are you truly committed? So if you have more diverse people in your workforce, is there actually a plan to move them into leadership roles? When you look at your board, when you look at your executive team, is there representation by gender, race, sexuality, other identities? Is it an intersectional board? Is it an intersectional executive team? When there's holidays, are you announcing and celebrating and recognizing all holidays or just some? What can you do to ensure that all people can show up as their whole authentic selves? And inviting them into the process so that you're not doing things that you think is best for them, but things that they actually want and need.
Absolutely. I've heard you mention that you, having lived experience as a double minority, you understand the unique challenges women and people from marginalized groups face, particularly in the workforce. How do you think these multiple layers of identity, your intersections, your lived experience inform the way you personally approach your work and intertwine with your leadership style?
I think I know I'm a more empathetic leader based on my background and experiences. I'm also more aware to the challenges and barriers that other people from marginalized backgrounds experience and face. But also I have a drive and a commitment to ensure that I'm doing my part, especially within my role, to open doors, to provide mentorship and opportunities for people of color. One of the things I recently did was start an executive coaching business. And one of the reasons for that was, as a woman of color operating within these systems, I've experienced a lot of self-doubt, perfectionism, some imposter syndrome. And I oftentimes thought it was all because of me, that it was my problem, that there was something wrong with me because of this. And now I look at it with a new lens and see that a lot of my views, even of myself, is something that stems from the system that I've been part of. And so I'm trying to utilize my skills to ensure that other leader of colors who are going through it still know that they belong, that they're capable, that they're qualified, and they don't let any fear or self-doubt keep them from pursuing their goals and their passions.
Thank you for that. Imposter syndrome is a common theme that we hear often among our MSW students, among the leaders that we bring into the career series that we speak to. So thank you for sharing that and for the work that you're doing to address that. I want to talk more about your recent ventures. You talked about owning your own executive coaching and consulting company. I see along your career journey, more recently, you've attained your doctorate in social work. You're a certified Dare to Lead, and I am a remarkable facilitator. And as I had mentioned earlier, we have some of our social change leadership program students in the audience today looking for opportunities once they graduate. Can you talk about the process leading up to first? Can you talk to us about the process leading up to deciding to get your terminal degree? And you kind of talked about your business as well, but I'd like to hear more about the process leading up to that as well.
Definitely. So my process is unique in that because I was so aware of the fact that there wasn't many people who looked like me in leadership, I realized that having a doctorate degree would be one more kind of notch on the belt that would allow me to be seen and respected for what I already brought to the table. And so, unfortunately, one of the reasons that I sought the doctorate was to add further credibility for the spaces that I'm operating in. But also, I'll say that while going through the program, I I knew a lot of what was within my program, but I kind of strengthened my skills around these various areas. So I've been designing programs for a long time, but I didn't know design thinking. And now I'm able to incorporate design thinking programs as I'm creating something. Also, I work for the Network for Social Work Management. So I've been part of a large network for a long time, but I wasn't necessarily utilizing it for my own benefit. And so while being in a doctoral program, it gave me kind of permission to seek out people outside my sector and outside my typical network for my own personal benefit. I also had an opportunity to focus on an area that I'm passionate about. So I was able to strengthen my research skills in addition to my writing skills. My overall confidence and self-efficacy increased. And then also I'd add, looking back at what I experienced and what I did in the program, I don't know if I would have started a coaching or consulting program so soon if I didn't go through that doctoral program. And so it also gave me the desire as well as kind of the courage to go after entrepreneurship in a way I don't think I would have had.
And what would be your advice for graduating students who might be considering the terminal degree or their next career path?
I'd say get work experience first. So my grandfather used to always say you have to crawl before you can walk. And so if you're interested in getting a terminal degree, yes, it matters. Yes, it can help you, but actual underground work experience matters even more. I think it's important to have research skills and to be able to write, but it's even more important to understand firsthand the experiences of the people that you're writing about and talking about. And so if you can have micro or macro opportunities underground, I think that is going to help you be even more successful once you get that next degree, if you choose to get that degree. Because I've oftentimes seen people who jump. Yes, you may end up with a PhD, or yes, you may end up with a DSW or EDD, but you've never actually worked a real quote unquote job, and you miss a lot of skills and opportunities because of that.
That's great advice. Absolutely. I found that to be true in my career. We have some individuals in the audience who had questions in the registration on general career growth and opportunities in social work in general. Are there any professional development opportunities that you go to find more opportunities, like how you found out about, for example, Dare to Lead or I Am Remarkable? What should organizations should we be following to discover opportunities like that?
So I am everywhere. I think it's important for social workers not to just lock themselves into social work in that particular box. So yes, follow NASW, yes, follow CSWE, join the network, etc. But for me, I like Harvard Business Review. And so I read Harvard Business Review religiously. I have a subscription to HBR. I also have a subscription to Fast Company. It's really important to pay attention to the trends that are going on in the world and how you're going to stay relevant. So I've learned of a lot of opportunities from these sources. For example, a few years ago, I went to a Fast Company Innovation Festival in New York City, where I was able to meet a variety of people across different disciplines. I also have attended TED Women, which was amazing and something that I've learned from and expanded my network because of. There's also lots of fellowship opportunities that you qualify for that aren't just within social work. And so I first fell in love with executive coaching when I had an executive coach through a program called the Coaching Fellowship, which is for young women leaders of impact. And so you apply, if you're accepted as part of an international cohort of women working in the social impact space, and you receive executive coaching at a reduced rate for a couple of months. So again, it's expanding your network, but also you're learning and growing from other people. And so again, there's LinkedIn, there's Twitter, there's social media, really thinking of the core areas that you're passionate about and following hashtags, key terms, doing research, reading business magazines, listening to podcasts. If there's certain authors that you love, like Brene Brown, who I particularly like, go to their website, subscribe to their website, and pay attention to what additional offerings they may have that you can participate in.
Those are all great. And some of those resources I was not aware of. So I will definitely be checking those out. Thank you for sharing. What is one piece of advice you wish you had known starting out in your career, or you would give somebody looking to work now in your field or position?
Okay, this is random, but it's the first thing that came to my head. And so as a first generation college student, I didn't understand money too well. And I'm still learning a lot about money. And so my first job out of school, I didn't realize how much debt I was going to have, in addition to what my student loan payments were going to look like. And so I wish someone would have really spoken to me about what I was getting into financially, but helped me come up with a plan so that it wasn't as alarming as it was when I first graduated. And then alongside that, your first job, when you have an opportunity to put money aside for 401k, I honestly did not know what that was like. And no one explained it. It was just like, here, you need to decide where you're putting money by this date. But again, no additional information or background about that. And so my first couple years out of school, I didn't put any money, for example, towards my 401k, because when you have heavy student loan debt and your wages might not be that high, why would you just give away money? But now, as I get closer to 40, I wish that I would have had this type of education and information earlier on. I'm also starting to see some of my peers who have already paid off their student loan debt or who are purchasing homes and doing other things because they had more education in this area that I didn't have. And so it applies to social work because I suspect there's a lot of us who have similar circumstances and lack that information. But it's also just a general life principle and thing that we all need to know.
Absolutely. And not something that they teach us in school.
Exactly.
Okay, so you just said as you approach 40. So now I have to ask you another question, which is your resume and your accomplishments have been very impressive up to this point. What do you think has led you to such a high leadership role at a relatively young age?
Good question. I'd say my network. Um, yes, I have skills, but I mean, again, there's a racial leadership gap in the sector. So realistically, I wonder if not for my network, if I would be in the position that I'm in. I have a lot of drive and determination. So yes, perhaps, but a large part of it was me knowing the right people and me having the courage and the confidence to speak to them about what I wanted. And so my last job before I was at the network, I was kind of moving up the ladder and getting more responsibilities, but I'm a learner. And so growth is one of my core values. Contribution is one of my core values. And so even while I was moving up and I had more responsibilities, I didn't see what was after that particular role. And I didn't know if I wanted to be in the role that I was in for a significant amount of time. So I started meeting with my boss and my boss's boss for informational interviews, asking them how they got to where they got, how did they know, what was their path, what books do they recommend. While I was working at that job, I had an opportunity to meet the NARA, and I was working with her to bring her in for internships for social workers, but I thought, she's quite impressive. And she's someone with a social work background who is doing amazing things. And I've never seen anyone with a social work background doing what she's doing. So I had the courage to ask her outside of that working relationship for her time so I could get to know her more and her path and her advice. And so I'd encourage all of you to do that. If you ever see or meet someone who's doing something interesting, something that drives your curiosity that you may want to do, don't hesitate to get to know them more and to ask for recommendations and advice. And don't be held back. If you're in a role and you're not really feeling it, then start figuring out what you do want to do, what you might want to do, and what skills and qualifications it's going to take for you to get there.
I love that. Just growing your network and not being afraid to learn from others who are in the positions you want. I see, speaking of the NARA, I see we have the NARA and our social change leadership program participants in the audience. And so I just wanted to take, we're about halfway through, I wanted to take a pause and see if anybody has any questions in the audience. I see some things popping up in the chat. So feel free to type any questions you have along the way into the chat box, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask Dr. Cherry a question.
Make sure it's an easy question. Of course, the NARA.
Well, it's so just to build on that point that you talked about with your informational interviews, Dr. Cherry is amazing at them. So just want to co-sign on that I'm horrible at networking, and I've learned so much at, like, if you take nothing from this conversation, that piece about just asking someone a little bit about what they do and garnering a little nugget from that. I've seen her work that magic multiple times and turn it into things that have blown me away. So it's great to watch because she's amazing at it, especially as an introvert, to see her be able to do that, which it's hard, I'm not that skilled. But one of the questions I had, and this isn't an easy question, so I'm sorry, but back to your research within your doctorate, have you thought, or are you thinking about how to help organizations with this aspect of better understanding that affinity bias? I know we see a lot in the work that we're doing with clients, as we're trying to change the sector, as we're trying to change, you know, how people move within organizations. We know in the field of social work that it's, you know, women, BIPOC individuals are all of the workforce. But then when you look at the people who are decision makers at the head, it tends to be all men, and particularly white men, and in these leadership roles, or, you know, it's not translating somehow. We know when we get, I had a really interesting conversation with Carrie, who's one of our interns, about philanthropy and this aspect around wealth and how we view endowments and other things. And so how do we change, and how can we build on the research that you completed, and share or build, or how have you thought about ways that people could use this outside of change makers, which I still want to support and still want to push, but what are other ways that we can use that information?
Good question. To be honest, I haven't thought about it in this way in some time, but in the past, I wrote blog articles about the importance of diversifying our networks. So if an organization with white leadership is saying that they are committed to this work and to these ideas, then, for example, with a program such as Change Makers, making sure that not only are the change makers diversifying their network by getting to know these white leaders, social capital, but that these white leaders are getting to know more diverse leaders across the country, so that when there's an opportunity for a board role, an executive leadership role, or any other opportunity, they're not just thinking of those from their immediate white network. They're thinking, oh, I have this whole other network of leaders of color that I can draw upon as well. And trying to figure out how to create spaces where this diverse networking can occur. Yes, we have conferences. Yes, we have other events. But again, the norm is that we're still going to go with those that we came with, those that we work with, those that we know have heard about, or simply those who look like us. And so I think for all of us, it's really just getting intentional with, if it's virtual, randomizing the groups so that, you know, different people are getting paired with each other so that they can have an opportunity. I'm also trying to figure out how to talk about sponsorship more, because we know sponsorship is something that we oftentimes focus on coaching or mentoring, but these white leaders can also speak about a Lakeya or a Thanera when we're not in the room, to create room for us to enter into these new spaces. So if you ever want to partner Thanera to come up with something, I'm definitely open, because it's another gap. And I think until you address that gap, you're not going to see real psychological safety and belonging within the workplace. But you also have to figure out a way to, unfortunately, make the leaders comfortable with getting uncomfortable enough to go there.
Thanks.
Oh, and another thing, I've been thinking about this for some time. When you look at the events of this past year, a lot of the events around diversity, equity, and inclusion has been led primarily by people of color, especially Black people, Black women. And so, for example, I was in this excellent panel about whiteness in the sector, but I want to see a whiteness in the sector panel led by white people. Like, I want to see them talking about their affinity bias and their other biases and what has stopped them from moving the needle, their recognition and awareness of this now, and what they are currently doing to do it. Because when I look at it from my perspective as a Black woman, I'm putting myself on the line. I'm exposing myself by talking about white supremacy culture. But if you're of the dominant culture where you actually have the power and the privilege to move the needle, why don't you put yourself on the line and speak about it publicly so that we can see and learn from you, and your peers who look like you can see and learn from you and know, okay, I can do this too.
Just as a aside, that we are starting a conversations on race with white leaders led by white leaders. So it's exactly that point, that it's a lot of racial trauma, it's a lot of racial fatigue for me to lead it within our organization. And so we've been working with our interns and staff to do that work. And so I agree, it's work, and we're going to follow up with you on this whole thing. Thank you for adding and answering my question. We're going to talk, of course.
You're welcome. Yeah, so necessary. Like I said, other people need to step up and have the conversations too.
Absolutely. And I have a follow-up question for you both, because, I've heard, just talking to individuals about this, these are difficult conversations. They're just difficult conversations for our staff to have. What would be your advice for just starting these conversations and having these difficult conversations at times?
First, you have to be willing to be vulnerable and assume the place of a learner. I don't know everything, you don't know everything. So come in with some humility, do some research. And so don't come in expecting someone else to teach and educate you. All of us at this stage are in a master's program or have obtained our master's degree. Therefore, we know how to use Google and other sources. So do some preliminary research, really assess and get to know our own privilege, where we stand, why, where this comes from. Is it from our upbringing, our childhood? So really get to know and understand our perspective. And then again, come in with empathy, willing to listen, learn, and try, and knowing that we're not perfect and that we will make mistakes, but a willingness to continue to work towards being a better ally.
Great, thank you. We had another question from the audience come in from Erica. She has no voice, but she wants to know, literally, physically no voice, she wants to know, how do you allay people's fear of systems in order to get them to act?
I need more information, Erica.
Erica, do you have enough voice to chime in and clarify?
I'm gonna try. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just think with the big systems, there's just this big fear always. In my current advocacy that I'm doing right now, which, by the way, thank you for your support, Lakeya. There's so much fear of retaliation, and they're gonna take they'll take something away, or just it's constant fear of like blackball, being retaliated against, losing whatever they've gained. Like if it's a university, they're afraid they're going to lose their degree after they've already gotten it. These fears are not, I just think it's the power, right? Like I need to show the power these systems have, and I'm trying to figure out how to say, like, if we do not say something to these big systems or do something, they have a lot of control and power now. What's going to happen if we never act up, advocate for ourselves? So I think it's like overall thing, that fear, right, of systems.
Gotcha. So, well, fear permeates everything and everyone to some extent, which is why a lot of change isn't occurring. And so I really believe change starts with one person, even if it's just you, Erica, hey, this isn't right. What are we going to do? Continuing to knock down the door, and the more courageous you are, other people will eventually follow. Well, if Erica can do this, I can do this. But there's also the reality that people have to be willing to give up something to get something. And so if you're a white leader and you're committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and belonging, but you're not willing to step down from a leadership role, you're not willing to make space, you're not willing to potentially lose your job, how committed are you actually to this? and assessing that for yourself. That's a personal question for you to answer. If you're not willing to give up any of your privilege, any of your power to make room and space for someone else, to what extent do you actually care? To what extent are you truly committed to this? And so we already know, most of us know, that the systems weren't designed for people who look like me. Therefore, I don't have the power and privilege to really do anything. I can complain, I can talk about it right now, I can write about it, but it's going to take people who don't look like me, back to the white leader conversation, to actually start, this isn't right. We need a policy change right now. I'm going to step down. Let's hire someone else. Let's do a search. And again, the research shows that there's qualified people of color who are ready to move into leadership roles, who actually want them more, but they're just not being given the opportunities. So again, for you, Erica, I think fear is going to drive us, but we're not going to see change until we move through the fear. And it's going to be scary. And another thing to keep in mind, do you want to work part of a culture that's not in alignment with your values? So if you're part of a system, if you're working at a university and they're all talk and you're not, you really care and you're passionate and you're not seeing anything change, is that the right environment for you? And if not, are you actually willing to leave or to just be quiet and stay there?
Thank you. I think I'm realizing there's a lot less allies sometimes than I thought, even in an MSW program. So thank you for that.
No, you're welcome. And it's sad once you have that realization. Allyship is a verb. It requires action. And we know our values and what we stand for. And when you come into something, especially a profession, and you expect something and you're not seeing something, that realization oftentimes is very disheartening. And then for you, deciding, what do I do with this new knowledge? I know.
Can I scream and rant? No, I'm just kidding. But
yes,
thank you.
And
thank
then
you,
do something about it.
Yes.
Carrie.
Yes, this is perfect for someone who has a deliverable in a few weeks on writing about power and philanthropy. So I really appreciate you being here right now. And Marie and Thanera and I have had a lot of conversations about this. Like, for example, I'm a board chair of a poverty alleviation organization that is run by a Black woman. One of the equity issues I find, and Thanera and I were talking, so many times boards are like, I need a giving board. Well, that idea that you need to have your board raise 30% of your budget or whatever, and you need diversity on your board, that doesn't work, right? Well, it does, but it's not, it becomes a little bit more of tokenism, which you don't want. Mm-hmm. And so one idea I had that we've seen done on our board is to endow a board seat. I'm going to keep giving you money, but you need to replace me with someone of color. But what happens then is you're not getting the person who's endowed as engaged with the organization, so they're less likely to give above what they've endowed, right? So I just would, and I think that those are all steps in the right direction. I just am, as I near this deadline, looking for more creative ways. Like, do you have any creative ideas? How can we do this when, obviously a great idea would just be a policy shift so that nonprofit leaders aren't constantly having to raise money, and so therefore constantly having to make sacrifices for what their board looks like because they need the money from people with power. And just if you had any ideas of other ways to kind of shift the balance.
Well, like you mentioned, first would be for foundations to give differently, so that it's not all and the nonprofit boards to, raise a significant amount of money. But all nonprofit boards also, they can change their bylaws and their policies with regards to how many board members they have, the amount of money people are giving, whether it's give or get. And so let's not assume that, all racially diverse board members can't give money, but because, it can depend on the person and their circumstances. Some people also will give from their organization, not from themselves personally. And so you may have more people who are worker bees who can't necessarily give $5,000 to $10,000 a year, but they're skilled at fundraising, event planning, marketing, and their time is money. And so they can invest and contribute in that way. You can also do junior boards. You could have the more wealthy board members sponsor these other board members. But I think that we use money as an excuse. If you really care about diversity, if you really care about equity, if you really care about inclusion, you're not going to let money be the justification for not having a racially diverse board. It's just plain and simple. You'll make it work. Diversity also, with more diversity, groups are more creative and more innovative. And so by having more diverse thought leaders, even if you have less money, more than likely you're going to have more ideas and more tools to get more money than perhaps you even expected to get from the start. So
totally, yeah, I totally agree with all these things. I think that it's absolutely, I mean, our board is actually majority Black women, so it's not like it's a it's more of just the kind of shift of what can people, of how do you keep people who have power and wealth engaged without giving them power, right? And that's what I feel like I am really struggling with to find the answer to, because they're so used to having the power given to them in exchange for their giving.
And that's the thing. It goes back to the conversation, one, about diversifying networks, right? But then two, do you actually want to give up your power? Do you actually care? If you really truly care, you'll be willing to give up some power. If perhaps you don't really truly care and power is more important to you, and so we need to begin changing hearts and minds too, which will start with by diversifying people's networks, by getting to know people as people more and having a different outlook. Then it will lead to changing some of our perspectives. But I mean, there's a lot of work to be done, obviously. And so I don't think there's, some golden solution. It's going to really take one person at a time, getting it and understanding the overall benefit and being willing to give away power, shift it, and knowing that they're still making a difference by doing that.
Thank you, Carrie, for that question.
Thanks, Carrie.
We have about 10 minutes left. Does anybody else want to chime in or have any questions? I know I have some, so.
Virginia's like, I'm ready.
I'm ready. Okay, good. I get to ask all mine then. I wanted to talk more about, I realized we didn't get a chance to talk much about your executive coaching company. And you said the idea developed from, you were talking about imposter syndrome and how you developed the idea. Can you talk a little bit more about the coaching company and how that came about?
Yeah, so I'd say I first started getting the idea when I had an executive coach. I felt, especially having been a therapist, that I could do this too. I have these skills. Then when I created Changemakers of Color, we were looking for executive coaches of color, and we couldn't find too many. Most of the executive coaches were white women. And so then I realized that there was a gap there, but that people of all races could benefit from racially diverse coaches. So then the idea stood with me more. And then I was trained as a Brene Brown Dare to Lead facilitator. And you know, Brene is a social worker, but when I went to the training, the majority of people in the audience were white women coaches. And a lot of what was being talked about resonated with social work too. And so as I was getting trained, I realized that there was room for me in this space and that I could bring it to social work and to my audience with a diverse lens and perspective, and that there wasn't too many people out there who looked like me doing this, which also gave me another advantage. And so my mission with my executive coaching business is really building the internal capacity of leaders. So that's that emotional intelligence, that's overcoming the self-doubt, the imposter syndrome, and all of the barriers that many of us have based on our identity, based on being first generation or whatever, that oftentimes prevent us from going after our goals.
Great. And we can share more information on the website. And if anybody is interested in learning more, I know I certainly am. Okay. So I don't see anything popping up in the audience. So just a fun round. I know you probably get this question a lot, so I apologize if I'm being repetitive, but I'm always fascinated in how leaders structure their days to be so effective. You probably have a lot on your plate. So I'm just interested, from the time you wake up and what time, if you're a morning person or a night person, and to the time you go to bed, what your day looks like.
Okay. My day is structured in a very crazy way. If I showed you my calendar, you'd probably be alarmed. But I'll start with today, for example. So I need to prioritize my own well-being more. So I recently added on my calendar Monday, Wednesday, and Friday that every morning I was going to get up and do a 4.5 to 5 mile walk. So that is structured on my calendar every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I have a Peloton, so Tuesday, Thursdays in the morning, that's listed on my calendar. I've also had a personal trainer, that's listed on my calendar. So these are set things Monday through Friday. I also have an administrative coordinator. I meet with her once a week for supervision. So that's something that's set on my calendar. And then every other time slot is a mixed bag. And so this morning, the first thing I did after walking and getting ready, I had an informational interview with a woman who is considering leaving her job and shifting to entrepreneurship. She is someone who was introduced to me. So I had a quick get to know you so that I could provide advice and recommendations to her. Then immediately following that meeting, I had a planning meeting for our annual summit, our virtual summit, and that was with my admin, my event planner, my board president, as well as our faculty member who's going to be program chair. So we were discussing logistics such as marketing, we were discussing pricing and additional things that we could do to drive interest in this particular event. Then, of course, I'm doing this right now. Yesterday, I spoke on a podcast. Last week, I spoke for a doctoral program. So I'm oftentimes doing these type of conversations throughout my week. I also have a meeting later with my admin to discuss another program that our organization have and structuring and planning for that. And then at the end of the day, as I kind of wrap up my nonprofit task, I also have 2 executive coaching clients tonight. And then after those clients, I'm going with a friend to dinner. So again, no day is the same. Some days after hours, I'm working on marketing for the business. I'm writing an article for the nonprofit or for something else. But it's really a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag of fundraising, marketing, business development, interviews, program development, board meetings, board calls, a lot of different things. Emails. Oh yeah, the time to actually respond to emails and do actual work. That is rare. which often lends to working into the evenings or on the weekends.
I can't believe at the end of the day, you said that you were going to meet up with a friend for dinner. It didn't seem like there was enough room in there to fit. What would your advice be? Especially, as going, a lot of our MSW programs, they're in school, they're working full time. As far as structuring our days and time management, how are you able to fit taking care of your physical health while also juggling these multiple jobs, while also being able to be social?
It's super difficult. Some days, some weeks, some months, it's easier. But I think the thing to do is to, again, prioritize it. And so we can prioritize the things that we care about. I care about my health and well-being, but to be honest, I wasn't prioritizing it. But I have people in my life who care about me and who hold me accountable. And so that reminder of, hey, like, drink some water. Have you had lunch today? Those things kind of, turned on a light for me of, okay, I coach other people around this stuff. I need to coach myself. What are some of the tactics that I encourage my clients to use? And how can I employ some of those tactics for myself? So beyond adding it to my calendar and chunking my other tasks, I also use apps like MyFitnessPal, where I'm tracking my exercise, my steps, I'm tracking my food and calorie intake. But then also, fun is important. Like, who wants to work just to work and pay bills without having fun? And so I try to make sure that Saturday, Sunday, I'm just having fun and just spending time with those who matter to me, no matter what.
That's great. And I like the idea of calendaring in and using apps to help track. Okay, so we're running out of time. You're a fascinating person to talk to, and I wish we could talk to you more often. Does anybody have anything last minute that they want to shout out or put in the chat box? I know this has been a very well-rounded and robust conversation, and we thank you so much for continuing to support SISG and for giving back to our current students and our future leaders. We're getting some nice messages in the chat box. Thank you for being here today. Much needed pep talk. So thank you so much for being here. And what I can do, as I promised, is send out the recording and send out some ways individuals can get involved in the network and share some of the resources that we've been talking about today. And everyone, if you're interested in following Dr. Cherry's work, follow her on LinkedIn. I know I always learn so much from her posts, so that's great.
Yeah, definitely follow me. Let's connect. And if you have any further questions, definitely don't hesitate to email me, message me, or whatever. I definitely want to support any way that I can. But otherwise, thank you for the invitation.
I don't know if I missed this in the beginning, but quick plug, go to our SISG group Facebook page. We posted Dr. Cherry's recent article on Medium around the future of work since the Great Resignation, and many of the core policies that we've always had here at SISG, she highlights, but really great tips for organizations to rethink what work means. And as you all think about what's next, as you head into the workforce, some things to think about in the types of organizations you want to work for. Are they thinking about these things? So please share that article with your networks. Just a really great resource. Excellent work, Lakeya. Dr. Cherry.
Thank you, Dr. Bailey. But no, also along those lines, as you look for work, remember that you're at an advantage right now and that you have power as well, and you get to choose where you want to work. And so come at it from a perspective of not only are you being interviewed, you're interviewing them for fit as well. And so if you look at my blog, or even if you just think about yourself and your values and what you want, making sure that you're coming up with questions to ask them to determine, do I even want to work here? Is this the type of culture I want to belong to? Are their values in alignment with mine? And if not, knowing that in this changing world that you're going to have a lot of other opportunities, and don't limit yourself just to social work jobs and social work agencies. Know that your skills are transferable and that you can work anywhere.
Very true. Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you, Dr. Cherry.
Thank you, Virginia. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.